You're listening to 24/7 World Radio.
Back with the second hour here, and I was going to have Brother David Swanson on, but I chose we have to cancel that. I'll have him on next Friday because I want to get into the third part of nationalism and the races. Nationalism and the races as they specifically apply, this biblical doctrine applies to the United States of America. So we saw that in Genesis 9, we have the creation of the three major races through Japheth, the whites, Ham, the blacks, and Shem, the Asians and Middle Easterners. From these 8 people, Shem, his wife, Ham, his wife, Japheth, his wife, and Noah, his wife, these 8 people has the world been populated. The races are not a result of evolution. Anybody who tells you that is a bold-faced liar. You do not have genetic specifics as a result of evolution or living in a certain geographic area. They are sovereign creations of God to keep mankind separate, lest we unite against him. And by the way, before you have the 3 races of the 3 sons of Noah, the race of man was one race. And I don't know what that was. No one can really prove it, but I'm sure it wasn't the whites and I'm sure it wasn't the blacks. It was probably some olive skin race descended from Adam. And it had one language. There was one language of the earth at that time, and the earth was not divided. So in a mere 1656 years, mankind corrupted itself with violence all throughout the earth. You also have the angelic sons of God copulating with women, and the offspring being giants, in Satan's attempt to destroy the messianic line of the seed as promised in Genesis 3:15. And so God then destroyed that race of man, and what's survived were the 8 people that lived on the ark and survived over a year being in water. And after that, we have the arrangement between the races as ordered by Noah. We have the subordination of Canaan, which would then extend to the family of Ham. And then we have the supremacy of Japheth and the supremacy of Shem over the blacks. That's why you had a white slave trade. That's why you had a Shemitic Arab Muslim slave trade. But you had no slave trade ever conducted by blacks, rounding up the whites and bringing them to Africa. The Muslims of North Africa kidnapped the Irish for a while and brought them into North Africa, into Morocco. But you never had a general black slave trade gathering up whites, or gathering up Shemites and bringing them to Africa and imposing a black supremacy, a black master, a Japetic, a Shemitic subordination. Never has happened in history. Now, the other thing I want to mention to you along these same lines is the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was written by 5 white men. One of them is Thomas Jefferson. The other, most important, I maintain, is Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman was a Bible-believing Protestant Calvinist. He wrote in the Constitution, "No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts." White Protestant Calvinists brought us hard money, stable currency, and no inflation as a result of it. So, as long as it was in place. So these men, these white men that wrote this Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence was advocated and urged by the great Presbyterian Calvinist preacher John Witherspoon the day it was to be signed and brought into existence in Philadelphia. And Witherspoon exhorted them to sign the Declaration of Independence. It was no pagan document. It was patterned after the Dutch Protestant Declaration of Independence. It's a white man's document for the benefit of white men that are Protestant and not Roman Catholics, I would add. There's only one Catholic that signed it, Charles Carroll, and he signed it in spite of his church. And he didn't participate in the deliberation of the Declaration of Independence either. It's very much a white Protestant and Baptist Calvinist document, patterned after the Mecklenburg Declaration of 1775, patterned after the Dutch Declaration of Independence in the late 1500s. And so we read here, to show you that the Declaration of Independence had to do for white men. It did not include black men. Otherwise, they're the utmost hypocrites that would ever sign that. So we read it was for white men. Malcolm X first taught me that. That declaration was for white men. He's right. So we read here in the Declaration of Independence, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature as God entitled them. The laws of nature, we have the law of nature, we have the law of nations, we have all this. This is championed after the Reformation. This is not the doctrine of rationalism. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which would impel them to the separation. First of all, what peoples have ever separated themselves from another nation and declared themselves a nation after that? The only peoples of the last 500 years that have done this have been white Protestants and Baptists who are also Calvinistic, resisting political tyranny with the sword of just defense, pursuant to the doctrines of John Knox and also the doctrines of John Locke, another Calvinist, another Protestant. So we read here, the only nations that have ever done this are white Protestant nations. This is what the Netherlands did. This is what the United States did. This is what Geneva did when those republics were established. We go on and say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That means they don't need to be proven. Self-evident that all men are created equal. They didn't mean all black men, all Asian men, all Hispanic men, all white men. They did not mean that. They meant that all white men are created equal, and Senator Robert Toombs of Georgia in the 1850s made this very clear in one of his speeches, and I have it in a book titled, Political Discussion, that's on my shelf. Only white men are in view here, not black men. If this was the case, they should have immediately liberated all their black slaves. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, namely all white men, are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. To show me the black nation that validated inalienable rights in any of their miserable histories. Tell me. Show me. Egypt, that was built primarily by Shemites and whites, Shemites and whites, talked of no inalienable rights. That's the highest culture in Egypt that Egypt ever had, except the white Protestants in South Africa and Rhodesia. The only ones who defend inalienable rights are white Protestant and Baptist Calvinists in the last 500 years. You won't read about inalienable rights of Plato or Socrates. They're not talking about it, those white devils, those communists. Remember, Plato's Republic is a communist document on par with Sir Thomas More's Utopia, which is another communist universal equality document. Remember, the whole doctrine of universal equality is designed to reduce all nations to the lowest blade of grass, as C.S. Lewis writes in his book, The Screwtape Letters, and particularly Screwtape proposes a toast. Let us reduce all of them to the lowest level, to all as a blade of grass. As Screwtape, a demon, writes to a lower demon. And by the way, Screwtape, C.S. Lewis was no Christian either. He was a Jesuit coadjutor. We read here, endowed with their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which would be property. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Show me one black government in history, apart from some white Protestant influence, that ever instituted a government for the protection of these rights. Liberia did, but that was because of their being influenced by white Protestant Southern men and white Northern men. The brother of James Buchanan, President James Buchanan, was involved, or was a brother or cousin, and was involved in this. He dies of African fever, seeking to establish a free constitutional republic of Liberia. But the blacks in and of themselves have never done it. All they've ever done is established empires and kingdoms with some savage black tribal chief with the power of life and death over them. That's what South Africa's going to now after they destroy all the whites out of there, and they've destroyed the whites out of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. They revert back to African savagery with tribal supremacy and chiefs. They're incapable of establishing limited republican forms of government. Those are established by white people that read the Bible. And blacks that are participating in that in America today are doing so by virtue of the influence of the Bible and white Protestants and white Baptists in their lives. Apart from that, left to themselves, they never defend inalienable rights, and they never institute governments for the protection of those rights. So therefore, this document is not referring to blacks. And it's also not referring to Asians either. You leave the Asians to themselves, they always have savage military dictatorships or emperors, emperor in China, emperor in Japan. They don't institute limited governments for the protection of inalienable rights. Asians never do this. So why is it then the Jesuits have brought millions of Japanese here, millions of Chinese here, millions of Vietnamese here, millions of Cambodians here, millions of Thais here, millions of them here. We have this huge Asian population here that's incapable of limited republican government, and it's in the genes. Go on. Who says? History tells us so. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among white men, namely. Because only white men have instituted these kinds of governments to secure these rights. Blacks have never done it. Asians never done it. Hispanics never done it. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is Lockean theory. This is the theory of John Locke. Well, who was he? He was a white man in the 1700s, came out with his notorious book then in the 1700s, I forget the name. He's white, and he's Protestant, and he's Calvinistic. This is a doctrine of these men, of my people, of my forebears. Just powers from the consent of the governed. And by the way, I will also add, the white Roman Catholics never set up this kind of government. White Roman Catholics is we want to serve the king. We want to serve the dictator. White Roman Catholics never established limited government. You say, what about the Irish Republic? The Irish Republic was established to break away Ireland from Great Britain so the Jesuits could subjugate it as it's subjugated today, race mixing the white Irish, and you got essentially a dictatorship in Ireland to the detriment of the white Roman Catholic Irish people. That's what you have in Ireland today. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Who in the world has ever done this except white Protestant and Baptist men, aided by their women who prayed for them? Because women weren't doing this. White women can't do this either, by the way, feminists. It's only white men that do it, that are manly, with manly firmness, that stand up to political tyranny. And political tyranny ultimately comes from Rome in each and every instance. And any white Protestants who are involved in political tyranny are pimps for the Pope, members of secret societies like Skull and Bones and Scottish Rite Freemasonry and others. all busy to do the bidding of the papacy because they're cowards, they're gutless, and they refuse to adhere to our wonderful white Protestant history because they don't have the courage enough to stand up, or they're really traitors in their hearts and will just betray us into the hands of the papists, of the Jesuits and the Pope, as well as the liberal Roman Catholics who like guns. They like to own guns because in a Catholic country, you can't own a gun. Just go down to Mexico and see if you have the right to own a gun. Go to Europe and see if you have the right to own a gun in England and Scotland. You can't own a gun there. They outlawed it. You can't own a gun in Germany and packing a gun in Germany. You can't do that. We got to reduce all these white Germans to penury and poverty, constantly working for commerce, and they don't have any rights whatsoever. That's why this government in Germany is so evil, so wicked, set up by this wicked military government in Washington with men like Kennedy assassin, head of Chase Manhattan Bank, Knight of Malta, John McCloy, the commissioner, the one who oversaw Germany after the war. All you Germans that hate that government in Germany, you ought to hate it. Set up by the Jesuits running this military government in Washington to your detriment. And now look what they're doing to you. They want you to freeze this winter, jacking up the price of oil or gas or whatever so you can't afford to keep warm. They've reduced you to nothing. Going on. Says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design is a conspiracy, for all of those who do not believe in a conspiracy or attack us as conspiracy theorists, the Declaration of Independence talks about a conspiracy. It's a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. That's what we have right now. Absolute despotism of Roman Catholic Joe Biden, advised by his Jesuit Leo J. O'Donovan and other Jesuits. We're under absolute despotism at a District of Columbia here in America, and you white men that don't want to accept it are a bunch of liars, cowards, and thieves, and you deserve what these savages are going to do to you with their concentration camps. Now that you've been addicted to commerce, and all that matters is pleasure and fun and commerce and whatever, you just keep living like that and not be concerned about your rights, and you're going to get a lot of knock on the door. Turn in your gun, boy! And after you turn in your gun, now we can get all you ever own. Now we can take turns raping your wife. Now we can steal all the food in your garage. Now we can take anything we want. Thanks for working for it. I have a friend who had a friend in the CIA, and the CIA laughed at people storing guns and weapons and food. He says, they're just storing it for us, for our army when we come around to take it all from them. That's what he said. That's what a CIA agent told my friend Steve Hirschman. Going on. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. So, and this is directed against the white man. The history of the present king of Great Britain, he's a white man. So it's righteous white men with the Bible resisting evil white men, supposedly Protestant, controlled by the Jesuit order, because King George III brought the Jesuits into England when they were suppressed by the Pope in 1773. The history of the present king of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object, that's called conspiracy, in direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. That's exactly what's been established here. We have a financial tyranny. They've taken our gold and silver coin. You save your money and you get older, their money's worthless. They have an absolute tyranny here now, politically, economically, academically. It's all a political tyranny. Legally, with our emergency war powers military government giving military due process, to you in the courts. How do you like that, white men? Military due process every day with the military colors in every county court, every state court, and every Commonwealth court, every federal court. How do you like that, being under military due process of law? Suckers. And don't you think for 1 minute that the whole Bar Association, the British Accredited Registry, don't you think for 1 second they know, or they don't know about this? They know all about it and they won't talk about it. You like that? You like being given military due process? I just finished up a federal case here in Harrisburg, and I made a motion for civilian due process of law, and the judge that was once chief judge, Connor, denied the motion as moot. That means we don't have any jurisdiction to answer this motion. It's moot because we don't have civilian due process of law, Phelps. We don't have that in this court. How many times we got a rule before you finally get it? And we white men just sit around and suck it up and think, oh, there's nothing we can do. Oh, we're waiting for the rapture. Oh, the Lord's going to come and save us. Don't you plan on it? Don't you think God's going to deliver us because of our laziness and apathy and sin? Don't you think for 1 second we're going to get the destruction that's been unfolding against us in our national judgment for rejecting the Reformation Bible, having our churches 501c3, and therefore begging the IRS, please give us a tax deduction when it's not necessary, and we're absolute servants to the government in our apostasy and sin and amalgamation and race mixing and mulattoism and mongralism and you name it, and hence it's on the way down. And you white women have contributed greatly to this, to produce all these mongrels and bastards to further destroy this country. You white women are going to get what you deserve. Either the concentration camps or the gang rape from the Turks that are coming for you, or the Russians that are coming for you. You just read what the Turks did to the Armenians during the Armenian massacre in 1950. You look what they did to the beautiful Armenian women. They took them all, they put them in harems, and they took turns raping them. That's what's going to happen to you white women. You look what the Russians did when they came east during World War II. They gang raped every white woman they could find, the Polish, the German, the Hungarian. They're going to do that here when they arrive. That's what's coming. And my question is, when are you going to do something about it, white women? When are you going to repent? When are you going to want to start giving birth to some white children and preserving your white nation, or at least being able to separate by a Declaration of Independence and say we now are establishing our own nation because there's a design in Washington to destroy our race, to destroy our English language, to destroy our historic Protestant culture. And we want no more of it, and we are separating, and that's what our white Protestant people did in the past. Because this Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with blacks. It's all white men are created equal. And it defines these white men as those who have been established nations for the protection of inalienable rights. Certain inalienable rights. So, the Jesuits, knowing that they can never ever. By the way, you people in Texas did the same thing. You have a Declaration of Independence too. Were there black men there declaring independence with you, or was it white Protestant people? It was white Protestants declaring independence. And so what? I'd rather be a black in subordination to some white Protestant on his plantation than ever be a black in savage Nigeria or now Liberia or any of the black savage nations. And by the way, in that particular ship, a movie called Amistad, it shows you that once the blacks were released and sent back to Africa, as they've been brought over here illegally as slaves, once they were released and brought back to Africa, their entire tribe had been massacred by another tribe. So the illegal act of enslaving them, what the Spanish did and brought them over here, ultimately saved their lives when righteous white Protestants released them and sent them back to Africa. But we can't say that because all white men are evil, aren't they? All white men are in privilege, and therefore all white men deserve to be broke and give everything they ever worked for to the black man because he deserves it. And you white women can get on your knees and you can be sorry about white privilege. You wicked sinners! dare you get on your knees before these black savages? Don't you have any courage anymore? Any knowledge of your history? The white power structure has used them to amalgamate us, to commit crimes everywhere, to kill us in the purpose of destroying white Protestant Western civilization. And that's why. And once these blacks are finished being used to that end, they're all going to die. They're all going to go to camps, or they will all be killed by the Muslims when they get here, because these Muslims hate the blacks. These Turks hate the American blacks. These Russians hate the American blacks. And they just look for the day when they can successfully invade here. And it's going to be invaders against the blacks, and the blacks are going to lose. They're going to be killed out of the land of Shem because they're not subordinate to Shemites, or they're not subordinate to Japhethites. They're in violation of Genesis chapter 9, of the subordination curse that Noah put the Hamites under through Canaan. That's why this whole doctrine of universal equality has shoved down the throats of America since the anti-slavery agitation has been anti-Christ, unbiblical. The Emancipation Proclamation is a sin and a crime, nothing more than a military effort to defeat the South and embolden the whites, and thus we're going down to free the black slaves. Free them from what? So they can come up north and be treated like trash? Where they can be totally without any protection? And after we free the blacks of the South, are you going to give them a country? Are you going to give them any land? Martin Luther King said they never gave us any land, and he was absolutely right. Remember, King was Boule. Remember a Boule society, which is like the black skull and bones. They didn't care one hoot for the blacks. And they used the equal protection of the law and 14th Amendment to protect the corporations 4 times more than they would protect any blacks, maybe 10 times more, for the benefit of the corporations, the white power structures, corporations. No person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property. In the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad case, it says, well, that includes corporations. That was in the notes. That wasn't even a decision of the court. Gets me fired up! Brother Eric John Phelps, back in a moment, 24/7 World Radio, and we'll get to the backing, the foundation of this unbiblical doctrine of universal racial equality in America.
This is 24/7 World Radio, and you're listening to The Eric John Phelps Show.
This is Brother Nicholas. Join me every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the German Bible Truth Hour, and at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Dutch Bible Truth Hour on 24/7 World Radio. This is Bruder Nicholas. Ich lade euch herzlich ein, mich anzuhören jeder Dienstag am 2 Uhr nachmittags, amerikanische Zeit, für die deutsche Bibelwahrheitsstunde und 3 Uhr amerikanische Standardzeit für die niederländische Bibelwahrheitsstunde am World Radio 24/7. Dit is broeder Nico. U bent hartelijk uitgenodigd om elke dinsdag om 2 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Duitse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen en 3 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Nederlandse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen op 24/7 World Radio.
This is The Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio.
Brother John Phillips back with the broadcast. Continuing on now, was setting the foundation for this anti-nationalistic, anti-white white race, anti-English language movement that is anti-Christ, because we white men from America and Great Britain took the gospel to the ends of the earth. So if you want to destroy the Reformation and the preaching of the gospel, the Jesuits have to destroy the white race of Western nations. They have to destroy their history. They have to destroy their commerce, because in their commerce they took the Bible to the ends of the earth. We have to destroy their military supremacy. We have to destroy all that. And so that's what's going on right here in America today. And just remember, the Jesuits control Trump and they control Biden, and they work together for the purposes of the papacy. Remember, communism always builds fascism. So that when the Jesuits are done using fascism to kill targeted populations, they reduce the population then to communism. That's what's been done to Germany. That's what's going to be done here in America. History repeats itself because the men directing the ways that history records are the same. They're the same brotherhood, the military order of the Society of Jesus, the most brilliant, educated, and learned men in the world today, and is an army on the march for the conquering of the last vestige of political liberty in the world, the nation, the white, Protestant, and Baptist United States of America, and all the other peoples that live here by virtue of the blessing of God that he gave to us when we founded our nation with our glorious American Revolution, and maintaining it with the War of 1812. Thank God for Andrew Jackson and the hero of Baltimore, Sam Smith. And so, is it worth preserving? If it is, we need to go back to some of our mores and some of our beliefs that we once had. And one of our beliefs was we believe in racial separation unto nationhood. Segregation, absolutely. Apartheid, absolutely. Unto nationhood. Unto nationhood. That's why I've always advocated for the last 25 years, the state of New Jersey be given to the blacks. The entire state. What's wrong with that? Because that way we can't foment a race war. We can't destroy the country, bring it into a new right if the blacks have their own nation. Of course, they're in the land of Shem. If they're not subordinate to Shem or Japhethites, they're going to lose it anyway. But give it to them. Give it to them. So, I want to go into this history of how we got where we're at. We had the agitation, the anti-slavery agitation, starting in the 1820s, thereabouts. One of the leading agitators in the anti-slavery agitation was a man named Thaddeus Stevens. Thaddeus Stevens was a wicked, evil, ungodly man raised in a Baptist home in Vermont. It just shows you what monsters Baptists can raise. So you have this anti-slavery agitation, and it was well settled that slavery in the ownership of the labor of slaves was a state property matter, and the federal government had no jurisdiction over it. Well, the agitation continues, and it's going to continue with the founding of the Republican Party in the 1850s, and you're going to have the debates between Roman Catholic Stephen Douglas and the infidel Abraham Lincoln. Even though Lincoln did some good things, even though he knew the Jesuits were after him for the defending of Charles Chinnockee in Urbana in 1852, thereabouts, he was not a believer till after Gettysburg, it appears, according to the minister in Florida out of he was what's his name? Anyway, he has a message on it. The Evangelistic Explosion, the guy that authored that, D. James Kennedy. He has a message on Abraham Lincoln that you need to get. So, you have this Federalist Party, which is a nationalistic or centralist party in the Republican Party. And what they're going to do is they seek to centralize power in Washington. But to do that, they have to break the white Protestant and Baptist Protestant South, and Black Baptist also. They have to break the South. So therefore, to break the South, they will have to incite a war. They will have to incite a war between the states. And they will do exactly what George Washington warned against, the factional parties that would ultimately divide the country and have a war. The Republican Party was a factional party. It only existed in the North. There were no Republicans in the South. And so that's what they did. And they agitated and agitated and agitated. Lincoln didn't want universal equality with blacks. He just wanted to end slavery, which he had no power to do. And so the South finally said, you've violated the Constitution. Therefore, these Southern states, we are seceding. We are resuming the powers that we delegated. And there were 3 states that reserved the right to secede, that reserved the right to resume their powers. They were New York, they were Rhode Island, Baptist Rhode Island, and they were Presbyterian Virginia. Those 3 states in their state ratification papers of the Constitution in the 1780s thereabouts, reserved those powers, reserved the right to resume their powers. And if those 3 states had it, all the others had it too. So therefore, the radical red Republicans said, well, the centralists, they said, you have no right to secede. So the Southern states should have said, well, then we will declare independence, just like the colonies did. And we definitely have that right, but because the South was also under Jesuit control through Jefferson Davis and Judah Benjamin and their Confederate commander of Confederate forces, Robert E. Lee, they will deliberately betray the white Southern people into the hands of Yankee North, which army is filled with drunkards, with bummers, with Irish Catholics brought over here by the Jesuits from about 1848 with the Irish famine that they created, using that wicked Queen Victoria, shipping foods and meats out of Ireland every day to the tune of some like 8 freighters a day. It would starve the Irish people, then drive them over here. Many of the Irish Protestants in the North dying of starvation. So they brought them over here to man the armies and the navies, and that's exactly what the Jesuits said in the meeting that Chinnicky talks about in 1852 in Buffalo, New York. We're going to man the armies, we're going to man the navies, we're going to man all the offices of political power, and then we will rule this country. So they agitated a war over the issue of slavery, when slavery was gradually being abolished in the first place and being repatriated to Liberia. You can read all about it in W.O. Blake's History of Slavery and the Slave Trade, written in 1860. It's 1,000 pages. Get it, read it. So now they said, well, now that South Carolina has declared its independence or has seceded, the Union is abolished. No, the Union is not abolished. The South Carolina just left it. So that was an agitation on the part of the South. The Union is abolished. You go down to Charleston, you go to that Confederate museum down there, and they have these posters that says the Union is abolished. No, it's not. South Carolina just left it. But it was to agitate that. And patriots don't want to see the American Union abolished. So they were suckered into volunteering, with Lincoln calling out troops against South Carolina, 75,000 volunteers. Now, I want you to realize Lincoln was a communist. Lincoln was no saved man early on. He was a railroad lawyer. And this is what he did. According to the book I have here, The Conspiracy Between John Wilkes Booth and the Union Army to Assassinate Abraham Lincoln, Dr. Robert E. Arnold is the author. We read here on page 6 what Lincoln did. Reread. The Confederate States knew that they could not win a long and protracted war. Their strategy was to utilized the superiority of their generals in training and experience to strike quickly and win some battles. They reasoned that when the corpses began arriving in northern homes, enthusiasm for the war would vanish. They were partly correct in their assessment, but they had not reckoned with the determination of Abraham Lincoln, who was going to see the war through to the bitter end, regardless of the consequences. Who was Lincoln working for? According to Alexander Stephens, who was the vice president of the Southern Confederacy, he said that Horace Greeley, the editor, the owner of the New York Tribune, was the man behind the throne, greater than the throne itself. That's Horace Greeley. Do you know who overseas correspondent was for the New York Tribune? He was Karl Marx. Karl Marx was Horace Greeley's overseas correspondent for the New York Tribune. And the black Karl Marx that would be further used to advocate abolition and universal equality would be another agent of Horace Greeley and the Jesuit order's white power structure. And his name was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a traitor. Frederick Douglass is portrayed as a hero in that Netflix film, Amend. Frederick Douglass would live up to his beliefs of universal equality and ultimately take a white wife for a white wife, which is evil, race mixing, miscegenation. And the whites of the South warned that if this continues, we're going to have miscegenation everywhere. Black men with white women, white men with black women, going to miscegenate everything, and there'll be nothing left. Evidenced by what existed in South America when the white Catholics mixed with the blacks of the slave trade and produced this offspring that could easily be governed by white, wicked, evil white men, just loyal to the Pope. So we read. Thus, the war that most thought would last 3 months and end in a political settlement lasted for 4 years. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. That means bring the body out. That was a wonderful, wonderful right secured by the American Constitution, the right of habeas corpus. He suspended it. He shut down newspapers that he believed hindered the war effort, newspapers that told the truth. Arrested opposition spokesman. Spokesman and ignored court orders ordering their release. Notice this, the opposition spokesmen were men like Congressman Blandingham out of Ohio that was against this radical program of these radical red Republicans in the North. You know what they did to him? They arrested him one night. The military government came and arrested him one night with their cavalry and shipped him south of the Mason-Dixon line. There's a book you want to get written. It's written by Marshall. It's called American Bastille. American Bastille. And it tells that Lincoln and Seward had a little bell, and they could ring a little bell, and an officer would appear, and they would immediately order the arrest of someone in the North. Lincoln puts the North under martial law. That's what he did. And so they would be imprisoned, and they could be held as long as necessary. That's what Abe Lincoln did. Get the book, The American Bastille by Marshall. Reread. And ignored court orders ordering their release. He instituted martial law in northern cities. Searched private homes without a warrant. And shut down the Maryland legislature. That's correct. Because if Maryland would have declared seceded, now you got Virginia and Maryland that are seceded southern states, and hence Washington, District of Columbia, District of Catholics, would no longer be under protection of the central government. So that's why he shuts down the Maryland legislature. And so the Marylanders went and joined the Army of Northern Virginia, and they sang a song called Maryland, My Maryland. Look at the lines of it. Look it up. He spent millions from the U.S. Treasury to buy arms without legislative approval and sometimes without Army input. So this is what Lincoln did. And he institutes the greenbacks that are not redeemable in gold, but later on they'll be made redeemable in gold. And so the men that were behind the making of the greenbacks made all that money by getting them redeemed in gold and further depleting the gold reserve of this country. Remember, Lincoln was behind the first income tax. Lincoln was behind the paper currency called the Legal Tender Act. Lincoln was behind the National Banking Act. Lincoln was behind the creation of the Internal Revenue Service, Internal Revenue, all of this. And then they also passed a law called the Indemnity Act, where they indemnified themselves that they couldn't be sued for these tyrannical things they did. That's what happened in this country from 1861 to 65. And the chief Jesuit over Washington, D.C. at that time was Bernardine F. Wiggett. F. Tupper Saucy writes about him in his book, Rulers of Evil in the Jesuit Order. One of the right things that he wrote about, even though I maintain he was a Jesuit coadjutor. And the other chaplain of the Confederacy, Father Darius Hubert. Now, I want you to see that he was a personal friend with Beauregard, who Beauregard is the one who fires on Fort Sumter and essentially begins the war. He is a American Southern French heritage Roman Catholic Freemason serving the Jesuit order by firing on Fort Sumter. And we read concerning the Catholicism here, concerning his friendship with Beauregard. Where was it right here? It tells us here in this book that he was a friend of Beauregard. He says, when Richmond fell, Father Hubert's Jesuit confrery Hippolyte Gashi was in the city as well, having been sent with a few nuns from Lynchburg to the Stewart Hospital in Richmond several weeks earlier. Gashi was sanguine about the arrival of, quote, the victorious Yankee Army, unquote, in the capital, greeting Catholic Union officers and chaplains as the, quote, best of enemies, and extolling their magnanimity, friendship. Quote, I don't know whether the Protestants of Richmond realized to what extent the kindly attitude of the conquering army was due to the Catholicism of its leaders, especially General Edward Ord, that's Fort Ord, named after this Roman Catholic general, and that consequently it is to Catholicism that the conquered are beholden. The Protestants of Richmond now were beholden to the Catholics and the Catholic Yankee Union generals. Good friends with this particular Jesuit. And this Jesuit here was also the friend of Beauregard, as I mentioned previously. I want to also mention to you that there was a Jesuit novitiate in Macon, Georgia, of which this particular priest was around and part of. We read on page 109. Ryan inveighed against the Confederate hero and close friend of Darius Hubert, P.G.T. Beauregard. Beauregard was the friend of Hubert, who in post-war New Orleans promoted an end to carpeting rule through acceptance of social and political equality for blacks. So we got to promote equality for blacks and further destroying the white Protestant South. Ryan also identified openly with the White League, for whose bloody uprising in September 14th, 1874, he offered a lengthy, fiery, and fully throated defense of New Orleans Exposition Hall 2 months later. The point is that Hubert was a friend of Beauregard. And Hubert would also be involved in Macon, Georgia, because you see there was a Jesuit novitiate in Macon, Georgia, a Jesuit college in Macon. Did you know that in Sherman's March to the Sea from Atlanta to Savannah, that Yankee Union savagery was routed around Macon so it didn't go through Macon? Why? Because there was a Jesuit novitiate there, a Jesuit presence there, and they didn't plunder Macon because of Darius Hubert. This shows you that the North and the South worked together during the war. This brings it to my next topic, that the South and the North worked together for the assassination of Lincoln, as Lincoln's assassination was again overseen by Bernardine F. Wiggett. Bernardine F. Wiggett was overseeing Edwin M. Stanton. Stanton was the bastard, the wicked sinner, who oversaw the entire assassination. He was the Secretary of War. He was a command of the general in General Christopher Columbus Augur, who was the general in charge of 20,000 troops in D.C. And so this evil, wicked Edwin M. Stanton orchestrated the assassination, carried it out, and got Southern Confederates involved with Mosby's raiders to provide a patsy whose name was James Boyd, to be shot in Garrett's barn while Booth had already escaped. And this is proven in this work here, the conspiracy between John Wilkes Booth and the Union Army to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. And Booth gave to Boyd his diary, and it was found on Boyd after he was shot. And there's much proof that Booth was not shot, but it was Boyd. And you have finest base work, The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth, written in 1903. But this author here, Mr. Arnold, who's a doctor and a captain in the Navy, shows you that indeed Booth did escape and Boyd was killed, and he was a Confederate officer. Looks something like Booth. And when they identified the body on a gunboat, a monitor called the Montauk, there was an admiral there that I found out in another book I have written by Emmett McLaughlin on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Rome, and he shows you that Admiral Baird was involved in identifying the body, and Admiral Baird was a 33rd degree Freemason. So you have Stanton. Stanton will be overseeing, Stanton is the one who's overseeing another individual. He's overseeing this evil Joseph Holt. Joseph Holt is overseen by Stanton, and Holt will oversee Lafayette Baker. Lafayette Baker was another evil, wicked, sinful man who, because he was involved in the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln, along with Stanton, is poisoned, and he dies in 1868 at age 41, poisoned with arsenic, according to this author, Dr. Robert E. Arnold. You see, the Jesuits eliminate their tools when they're done with them. Lafayette Baker knew too much. And you have Hoyt. You have Hoyt and John Bingham. These are the evil, wicked sinners that are prosecutors in the trial of the conspirators, which were all Roman Catholic, by the way. And it's a military tribunal that's going to try them, which was illegal and against the law. You don't try civilians with a military tribunal. There was a general on that tribunal named General Thomas Harris who came out and showed that Rome's hand in the assassination of Lincoln was absolute. Charles Chinnicky comes out with his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, 1886. After he investigated the assassination, said nobody in Washington wanted to stand up and be counted. He said that it was the Jesuits who killed Lincoln. And so one of the men on the trial of the conspirators was a man named John Bingham. He was a congressman out of Ohio. He hated the South. He hated the white men of the South, just like Thaddeus Stevens hated him, just like Charles Sumner hated him, just like Wade hated him. This John Bingham will be the author of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. that all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. They reverse the origin and character of American citizenship, making it national and making it national for whites as well as blacks. This was the beginning of the centralization of power with the 14th Amendment. And John Bingham noted this wicked sinner, subject to Stanton, subject to Jesuit Bernardine F. Wiggett out of Georgetown, and hence now we are shackled with military government since March 9, 1933 for the destruction of our nation, our language, and our culture, which need to be resisted unto blood, according to Hebrews 12:4. With Eric John Phelps, thank you for tuning in today. Book Vatican Assassins. Go to my website, vaticanassassins.org. 24/7 World Radio. Pick up some things that will be helpful to you. And I trust you have a good Lord's Day coming up, and hopefully on Monday we'll meet again. Until then, Maranatha.